so excited today to have Gretchen Schoenstein on to talk about what it's like to run half marathons living with multiple autoimmune conditions. Thank you so much for being on the Arthritis Life podcast.
I'm super excited to be here, Cheryl. Thank you so much.
Yeah, just to get started, can you share, where do you live and what is your relationship to joint pain, let's say, and or autoimmune disease?
Absolutely. So I live in Sonoma, California. Sonoma's a little town that makes wine north of San Francisco. And my autoimmune journey started when I was a kid. So as a lot of us know, there's now over 100 identified autoimmune diseases and disorders. And one of the ones that I had when I was a kid, I can't pronounce it. It has to do with the esophagus. And it's interesting looking back now. I got the experience of how difficult the journey is to get a diagnosis, even at that young age. In terms of being aware of my joints, that actually started only a few years later as a teenager. And then in particular, when I was diagnosed with I eventually got diagnosed with sarcoidosis, which affects the joints, and in my case, or affects the lungs, and also in my case, it affected the joints. And it's pretty severe, but now it's my way to be aware of what's going on in my body. When I start to feel a little bit of that inflammation, I'm like, okay, now it's time for me to pay attention and take care of myself.
Yeah, that is definitely a lesson that chronic illness teaches us, listening to our bodies. And I wanted to ask, what age were you at when you got the official sarcoidosis diagnosis?
It was about 15 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, it came on very suddenly. From that standpoint, I also have Hashimoto's. So I've been dealing with autoimmune diseases since I was a kid.
Right.
And 12 was the age I was when I got diagnosed with Hashimoto's. That's a very early time frame for that. And I will say that I got very lucky with the doctors, because a lot of people in the autoimmune world know this journey of you see a bunch of different doctors, you get a bunch of different tests, you get a bunch of different opinions. And there was a whole lot of, we don't know what's wrong with her, we're not quite sure. Meanwhile, I'm 12 years old, I'm trying to just like live, or in my case, sleep, which is what was happening at the time. And then finally, it was a doctor who said, I got to think outside the box. And I think that's one of the things with autoimmunity is you get conditioned to learn how to think outside the box. And I've embraced that. That's why we're talking today, right? Because I've been doing some bold things to try to do that. And it's almost like bold is my comfort zone, because of of having to be more innovative and proactive with how to approach my health. And so it was this one doctor who said, I think it might be something else. And that's when the blood work came back and said, oh yeah, you got Hashimoto's. So I'm super open about my health, and getting more open about it because I want to make a difference. And, I've been on Synthroid since I was 12, and can't get off it now. Right. And it's something that they would probably do it different now, but that's what they did then. And so there was a lot of fake it till you make it as I was growing up through all of that and dealing with all of tiredness. And then, all those years later, I get hit with sarcoidosis. And that was an incredibly long, incredibly painful diagnosis journey. Absolutely.
The sarcoidosis. And just for those who don't know what Hashimoto's is, it's an autoimmune disease that affects your thyroid, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Double checking.
Yes, I like to get the autoimmune diseases that have really long, hard to pronounce names. Keeps it more interesting.
Well, and I was thinking I was like, you mentioned the esophagus. I was like, I bet it's that one that's like eosinophilic esophagus.
Something like that. Yeah.
Eosinophilic esophagitis. Yeah. Oh my, so that's
one.
a lot. That is a lot. Yeah. So you've already kind of from age 12 learned how to navigate chronic illness to some degree. But then what were your symptoms of, you're the first person, I should say, that I can remember. So apologies if I'm having brain fog, but you're the first person I remember that it has had sarcoidosis that I've had on the podcast. And I'm really glad, because it's more rare than rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic, and ankylosing spondylitis. So it's not the first thing that comes to people's mind, but that's why it's so important to have awareness about it, because you might be the person who they don't know, quote unquote, what it is, and it actually is sarcoidosis. So what were your symptoms?
Initially, it started out, I had joint pain, like severe joint pain, bilateral. And I had been traveling with my partner at the time. And when I went to one doctor, he initially said, "Oh, you were on a plane for a long time, so I'm sure it's just that." Then I went to another doctor who said, "You have carpal tunnel syndrome." I'm like, "In my legs and in both arms?" Not quite sure about that.
There's not their only carpal tunnel in the body is in the wrist. Just for the record.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
That's
I'm an
what I
occupational
thought.
therapist, so
Right.
yeah.
So, and
unless I forgot something from school.
Yeah. And I mean, they gave me a bunch of pain meds, and that sort of helped, but not really, because that's not what was happening in the body. And so then it became so severe. The way I always explain it is like my lungs blew up and my joints blew up from head to toe, and not blew up like in a well, it was actually quite violent. It was incredibly painful. I often use the phrase, there was this, it was almost an exquisite pain. And I have people push back on that, and they're like, "Exquisite is this meaning?" I was like, "Well, but it's very specific pain. It was so intense, and it takes your breath away." And I could walk for about 6 weeks, and every day my joints would get more inflamed, more swollen, more red, more black and blue. And I had such a hard time breathing. I still have sometimes a habit where I'll put my hand on my chest when I'm talking, and it's just a habit from that time frame of like I'm not able to get a full breath. And so multiple trips to ERs and hospitals, and being told we don't know what it is and we're still going to send you home. And then 3 days later, it would be even worse. And I go back to the ER, and one time they actually sent me home with crutches, which is odd because I couldn't use my arms. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with the crutches.
My
So I went home.
That's not patient-centered care. Sorry. As an occupational therapist. No.
I mean, and the reason I'm sharing this part of the story is because I know how many people have gone through something similar, right? It's this frustration of not feeling heard, not feeling seen, and then feeling very alone and frustrated from that. It's like I have joint pain, like in my arms too. So how am I supposed to hold the crutches, right? Went back home, crutches stayed in the hallway, laid on the bed again, and then finally went into the ER. I don't remember how many times, 3, 4 times. And they said, "Well, we can get you into a rheumatologist next week." And at that point, it was like, I don't know how I'm supposed to live like this for another week. It was that painful. It was that violent. It was that scary. A lot of fear, just a ridiculous amount of fear. And it was a few days later, and I finally got into a rheumatologist. I was in a wheelchair at this point, and got into the rheumatologist, and he took one look at me and he said, "If they had let me see you last week, I would have admitted you to the ER immediately." Wow. So suddenly there's that hope. And again, a lot of patients understand this. So suddenly there's that hope. You're like, "Oh, somebody gets it. Okay, now I'm going to, hang on to this person because maybe they can get me some help." So I got into the ER, and then all of a sudden, then it's all the tests, right? Now they're like worried about my heart, worried about all these other things. And the fear starts to rise up, right? It's a little bit scarier at that point. Call family in, you all need to get here, that kind of thing. And I spent the next 8 days in the hospital, and I have a light humor about this at this point. It's been long enough. Right. And you got to have a little gallows humor to get through some of this stuff. And I'm like, I saw all the ologies, right? I saw cardiology and dermatology and rheumatology and neurology. I know there's like 8 new.
Probably physiatrist. It's physical medicine and rehab because it's the joints. So sometimes they go along with
pulmonology. Spend a lot of time in pulmonology. So, in every test you go in, you want an answer, and yet some of the answers could be worse than what you think it could be. And eventually they narrowed it down to either lymphoma, which is what killed my dad. He had brain cancer, lymphoma, or sarcoidosis. And then they said, that was a Friday night, and they said, "We can't do the test till Monday morning."
Oh my
So I sat
gosh.
there in the hospital with my family going, is this like, do I have the same thing my dad does? And then they finally did the test on Monday with, did a full bronchoscopy, and it came back sarcoidosis. So it was like, okay, now, take steroids and all of that other protocol aspect of things. But it was a lot, it was very painful, very scary, very long journey to get to that diagnosis. And then, a long time of recovery after that.
Yeah, and I think you really described so well that roller coaster of emotions when you go from, can someone just listen to me and take me seriously?
Yes.
And then they are, and then you're like, okay, well, now this has opened the door to like a whole new set of fears and worries, like you're saying, because now
Right.
they're really taking it seriously.
Right.
And that's just such emotional whiplash.
Oh,
Like I had a
100%.
I had a much less emergency situation than you did in every possible way, but I still vividly remember that whiplash between being desperate for someone to listen to me because they kept saying I was just anxious. So they were sending me to psychiatry, psychology. And I'm like, I'm anxious because no one's listening to me.
Right. Right.
I'm sick.
Right.
They're like, well, you have this disease called people who think that they're sick who aren't sick. I'm like,
Mm.
uh-huh. And then, then like 2 days later, they're like, actually, you have like severe rheumatoid arthritis, like all your numbers off the chart. We need to start you on this like heavy duty medicine. And I was like, wait, what? So sorry. I mean, that's just totally, I walked into the claim. I was in pain, but nothing
Yep.
to do with, not as severe as what you're talking about. So I think um, that must have just been such and a whiplash. And then you're also like, well, you're relieved that it's not lymphoma,
Right.
but then it's sarcoidosis and I have to learn what that even is. Sorry. So
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, it was both a stack of paperwork and a lot of, Googling what it all is. And it's still, I think it's it's a wide ranging disease. There's many different syndromes of it. It's still somewhat unknown and not as well studied, obviously, because it's a lot more rare. And I've had a lot of flare-ups. And look, I think most of us know that you tend to, when you are diagnosed with one autoimmune disease, it seems to open the door that you will have others, right? I've got other ones that I won't go into, and there is always this, it's weird. It's like it's not that you're wanting another one, but you'll have a flare up of something, or you'll feel something shift in your body, and there is this awareness of like, what else? Is there another one on the horizon? And yet at the same time, after all this time, it's kind of like, okay, I got this too.
Yes. Yeah. In the Room to Thrive support group, we've started calling ourselves autoimmune collectors. Like collect them all. Like we need a
Oh
bingo
my
card
God.
or something.
I love that.
Again, it's
Actually,
that
again,
gallows
gallows
thing.
humor.
But,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
You got to
it's
have it.
yeah, and yeah, you don't have it yet. I mean, and it's at that point when you were first diagnosed, and once you've kind of survived, for like a better word, one complex chronic condition, then you kind of get the sense that, okay, I've built this experience of this sounded really scary and I've kind of gone over the ups and downs and learned that I can cope with it. But oh, I just wanted to, just for the record, for people listening, mention that because I always thought sarcoidosis, I'm just going to state the myth that I believed in. So this is not the truth. I thought sarcoidosis was always the something to do with inflammation in your lungs. It typically is, but like according to the Mayo Clinic site, right, it's the growth of tiny collections of inflammatory cells, granulomas in any part of your body.
Yes, all of the above.
Okay.
So that is the one, from what I understand, the common thread through all the various kinds is the lungs, which is why that was the determining factor, is like basically the granulomas from the lungs, because it could also be lymphoma there, right? So it's like if we see the granulomas, then it's sarcoid. If we don't, then it's lymphoma. And I'm obviously simplifying the heck out of it.
No, and
I'm not a doctor. I don't have any commas after my name, but
comma, awesome person / multiple half marathon runner. I mean, I'll put some commas. But yeah. And actually, so the next question I was going to ask is, what are the treatments? Like, what have you tried and how has that worked?
all sorts of things, you name it, I've tried it. I obviously, like a lot of people who deal with some form of autoimmunity, I've been on more steroids than probably, maybe not more than NFL players, but a lot. And sorry, NFL players. So yeah, I've been on a ridiculous amount of steroids, and I grow tired of that protocol. That's like the first thing to go to. And so like, as I mentioned earlier, I do take Synthroid every day. And that is the amount of times that I have been poked and prodded and had blood tests. Like, again, this is something that in the autoimmune world, like, you're constantly getting blood tests. I couldn't possibly be afraid of needles at this point. And then when you're in the hospital for 8 days and it gets to the point where they're having to find the tiniest needle because all your veins are like, we're done. But I've had my blood tested more than I could possibly imagine. And sometimes I think about it as like, I'm stronger because of all of this autoimmunity journey, right? It's like, blood tests don't bother me, infusions don't bother me. It's just, there's this grit, I think, that a lot of us have. It shows up different for everybody, but it's kind of like, if you can survive the diagnosis journey, if you can, understand how the treatment works best for you. And so, like I said, I'm always having to adjust my Synthroid, having to add things, dial it down, dial it back up, so you've got to manage that, be super hyper aware of it. And I've had times where, I've gone on a trip. I'd never, of course, anymore put my medication in a checked bag. You just learn that one time, and then you never do it again. And you're like, and I've been without my medication, and now here's all the fallout from that. So, and then in terms of treatment, like it really depends on the flare-ups. It depends on infections. It depends on the inflammation. And then, after all these years, I'm bound and determined to create my own team of people who help me understand my body better, and they understand it and say, hey, let's try this. What else is possible, as opposed to, you can't do that. So I've added acupuncture. That makes a huge difference for me. I do a lot of infusions. I work with a naturopath as well as my regular doctors. I have my, corticosteroid inhaler and my rescue inhalers and all that kind of stuff always nearby. So it's adjusting the treatment plan for where you're at in that moment, which you can apply that to anything in life.
Yeah, I think that's, a beautiful example of, the natural methods can be done alongside traditional medicine. That's something that comes up a lot on this podcast. I mean, for rheumatoid arthritis, the treatments are much more targeted. They're very specific, and they really can put the disease quickly into remission, which is amazing. In your case, there really aren't as many good treatments that are really targeted for sarcoidosis or Hashimoto's, that, from my understanding. So it's even more reason to, I think of it as like, throw all the tools, in your toolbox at it.
Yes.
Unless there's any evidence, like in the case of RA, just for the record, like chiropractic, there's evidence of harm potentially because of instability of the cervical spine. Like, you have to be careful if something might harm you. But, but yeah, I mean, I think most patients, and you probably have been asked this by a lot of people, they just want to know, like, hey, how do you manage this? Like, what does it look like? What's a day, in your life? Like, oh, I go to the acupuncturist, on these days, and I take these medicines when I have a flare up. And I think it's hard. You mentioned flare ups. Do you ever have a hard time explaining what like a typical day in your life is? Because it's so variable. Like, I'm with RA, mine goes up and down. Is that similar with you with sarcoidosis and Hashimoto's?
100%, 100%. It is. I love how you put that. It is very, very variable.
Very variable.
Very variable. And you have to become both your own expert and your own advocate. And you, unfortunately, but like, because of the length of my having dealt with all of this, I'm actually quite used to not being heard, unfortunately, and not being understood. And so you're a little bit of a lone ranger in your health. And so then when you find people who understand, when you find people who get it, great. And I no longer take it personally when people don't, because it's not about me. That's their limitation, and that's fine. And I accept that. And then I meet them where they're at. And so I just shift what my expectations are. And so with a flare up, there's the few people in my life who understand it. I just have to say flare up. right? And they're like, okay, I get it. I actually just had a flare up, and some of my flare ups can be so severe I end up back in the hospital, right? And then other times they're what I've gotten a lot better at is I've started thinking of it as like, where's the canary in the coal mine, right? And then that helps me go, oh, something's going on. So I had a flare up in February, out of the blue, without thinking, without saying, oh, I'm going to be tired this week. I fell asleep on my couch at 8 p.m. and I didn't wake up till 8 or 9 the next day. And that previously would have made me say, oh, I just must be exhausted about the X, Y, or Z this week. And my first thought was, canary in a coal mine, what do I need to do? And so, and I had some worries that, oh no, what if this takes me off my game and I'm not able to do this big, bold challenge? And so I was worried about that. And so it almost made me more assertive in terms of how to take care of that. And on that particular case, I think because I jumped on it so quickly, got to my doctor, said, let's do some blood work. What do I need to do? And then I just rested as much as I possibly could instead of fighting through, right? And that's always the balance. Like I rely on grit. I rely on relentless resilience. All of it has to be done with awareness though, right? Because I can't just, every single time I have pushed through simply for the sake of pushing through, I paid for it.
That is so poignant. And I think that's one of the most common FAQs I get. And I'll say, I'm like not an exercise guru in the same way you are, but I was a college soccer player and then I became kind of less active over the years in my RA, but I just restarted my own exercise regimen. Okay. And I started strength. I always loved cardio. I'm one of those freaks that loves running actually. But I didn't like strength training, or I just didn't prioritize it. And I just started strength training like twice a week in a gym setting with like a personal trainer. And it has been unbelievably helpful for my RA, for my cognitive symptoms, the brain fog. I thought, oh my gosh, I was doing this for my joints and now my brain fog is a lot better. My sleep is better, all these positive things. But you're right that there's been a couple of times in the workouts where I'm like, no pain, no gain. And I could tell I'm about to push my body too far and I just do it anyway and I pay for it.
Right. Well, and that's part of this, right? Is that look, one of the things I love to always think about is progress, not perfection, right? So like, I'm never going to get the flare-ups perfect, but I made progress this last time that I caught it sooner. And the listening to the voice, do I push? Do I not? I have a lot of conversations with friends about specifically that. Like, when do you listen to the voice that says, today's a rest day, nice try, you're not going out, versus, no, this is the day that even though you're tired, still push yourself because there's going to be something that comes from this. I've been trying to hone those voices for years and I still sometimes get it wrong, right? I still, go right when I should go left, and, and vice versa. And so then it's like, okay, now what do I do with that? I just deal with the reality of what is. Like, I might have gotten it wrong, but can I learn something in this, right? So that's why then later, for the example, this last flare-up, I've gotten it wrong before. So now I'm applying that knowledge, right? Instead of beating myself up, it's like, okay, next time I will, right? Yeah. And for what it's worth, I just got into strength training last June, so it hasn't been yet a year, and I'm a like heavier weights, which I'd never done before, and I'm not going back. I love it.
Me too. I'm totally I started doing it with my parents too. Like once a week I go to their house and like I'm having them do the exercise bands too, because I know it's important like as we age and stuff. But yeah, I think, I was going to ask, a lot of people ask me about symptom tracking. Like what you're saying is, you notice your own patterns, you start noticing the canary in the coal mine. Like for you, sleep is a big one for me too. Like if I suddenly find my body craves and needs more sleep, that's a sign that something is about to be off. Like either I'm coming down with an external, do you track your symptoms in like a journal or an app, or do you just kind of keep track of it in your head?
I wish I could say I keep track of it in a journal or an app.
I'm just curious.
It is mostly my head. From the standpoint of it just, again, it's all an evolution. Who knows? You and I could talk in a year and I'd be like, oh my God, I've been tracking in an app. Like if you told me 2 years ago, I'd be a hardcore, faithful weight trainer, I would be like, yeah, right. So I'm open. I stay, one of the things I stay curious, and that applies to so much of this. And so I'm open to it. I don't at the moment track it from a really formal way. I am trying to be, I work on trying to be really present and staying curious.
Yeah.
And that aspect of things has helped me then notice sooner that something shifted. And you're 100% right with the fatigue. That's that like, oh, something's up, as opposed to, oh, I'm just overworked. It's like, okay, let me track what the last week has been like. Is that really what it is? Or have I been energized and this just came out of nowhere? So the way I approach everything from my autoimmunity journey to an inflammation to running and everything in between, like I always have this visual of like I'm constantly breaking glass to make a mosaic. Right. And if you that feels more in motion, that feels more present, and that feels less restrictive, like less limiting. Because it's like, okay, I don't like the way this glass is looking. I'm going to break it and make a new mosaic.
That's beautiful. That's really a beautiful image. And I do, I think for me, I heard of like a thread of self-compassion in what you were saying, which like you give it your best guess. And if you ended up being wrong, you hold that with a sense of like curiosity and self-love, and you say, okay, I did my best, rather. And that's where I think I don't keep track of symptoms in any sort of master file either. Right. So some people, it really is a personality thing. Some patients really find it empowering and they feel a sense of control when they track symptoms and notice patterns.
Right.
Others start and they get overwhelmed and they're like, I actually feel worse because now I'm just writing down all the times I feel crappy in my day. So, it's just
yeah.
Context is everything.
Do what works for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Do what works for you. I love that.
Yeah. And we are going to move shortly on into the actual running part of this, but I didn't want to forget. So I'm going to, we also talked a little bit about social life, and with flare-ups, how do you, you mentioned a little bit, like some people won't get it. This is like a few minutes ago. You mentioned, that's one of the common threads that comes up in my support groups as well, is like, how do I get friends and family or loved ones to understand that this is going to be an up and down journey, and there's going to be flare-ups, there's going to be remissions, and not like blame me or anything. What would you like to share about like maybe your experience or any tips for people? Help us. No, just kidding.
Yeah, I think, I just saw this great phrase that is now in our vernacular currently, as having a couch friend. And it was something about that. And I've, of course, applied that to something around this. And it's like, look, the reality is there's a level of acceptance of not everybody's going to get it. Right. And so that was the shift for me. Instead of being in this place of being mad at people or I can't believe they don't get it, it's like, look, I do my prep work by knowing what kind of an environment I'm walking into. If I'm walking into a home or a meeting or a group of people that are not going to get it, I'm not going to stand there and be pissed at them for not getting it. I know they're not going to get it. So I'm going to show up in a way that works best for me or remove myself from a situation. And then there's people who do get it. And then I think there's multiple categories. Like I don't approach life in a binary way of like, there's either people who get it or there's people who don't get it. There's also people who want to get it. They may not fully get it, but they're still there for you. Right. And that's like, I have couch friends. One of my dearest friends down in San Diego, we can sit on a couch all day long and watch movies. And I don't feel like I have to show up or be a certain way. Or if I'm down there and I'm battling some kind of flare up, it's like, if I got to take 4 naps in that day, I can do that. Right. And other time, there's going to be other situations where I know that's not possible. And, I do kind of push myself. But again, I've been dealing with this more of my life than not. So I don't fully know any different. Wow. I don't know what it's like to be that person that doesn't have to worry about their health. Right. Like I've talked to people who are like, oh God, I never go to the doctor. I never have got my blood drawn. And I'm like, I get stopped short by that sometimes. I'm like, that's so different. And I almost said what a blessing. And yet I know that I'm who I am because of this lifelong journey that I've been on with autoimmunity, and I'm stronger because of it. I show up in different ways. I make bolder, bigger decisions because I'm trying to do something, maybe make a difference and do things like that. And doesn't mean that I haven't had weeks, months, years of darkness and fear, and being, abandoned and feeling alone in a lot of ways. But instead of, I've gotten to a point in this journey where I'm trying to figure out how to, I don't want to, it's not try like make the best of it, right? It's how do I use what I've been through to do more? How do I use what I've been through to teach myself to create more awareness about how my health journey can continue to unfold? Like it's not over for me. It's like I feel like I'm trying to mine the experience of what I've had in order to both improve my own health and help other people.
Yeah. I once heard this phrase, turn your pain into purpose.
Mhm.
It really resonated. Like,
Yeah.
and it's so true. Like you said, I think we have a similar mindset of like, I don't want to sugarcoat it or say, oh, you just make the best of it. But it is like, actually, I follow the work of a psychologist from the University of Washington called Dr. John Gottman, and
Mhm.
he has this thing about yeah, a lot of what he does is about relationships, but I actually relate a lot of it to chronic illness too. He talks about like turning towards versus turning away, like
Yes.
in context, and I think of that not just in terms of a romantic partner, but
Yeah.
turning towards like your life with a
Yes.
disease versus turning away and trying to fight it. Living in harmony with it is such a more, peaceful way to live, I think.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I'm amazed as I started doing this fundraising, how many people from previous professional roles that I've had didn't know. And I
Mm,
was like, oh my God, that's right. I spent so many years trying to pretend like everything was fine.
mm,
And there's a lot of factors and reasons into that. And there is a freedom in being more open. It's interesting. And I'm still learning, I'm still pushing, I'm still working with doctors. There's, some that come in and you work really well with them for 6 months and then you move on to somebody else. And I'm always trying to figure out what's the right balance. And I feel like in the autoimmunity world, you use words like balance and juggle and manage and all of those types of things all the time. But that is what we're doing, right?
yeah.
We're juggling this and we're managing this. And then again, you can be doing everything right and something can still go wrong. And so what do you do with that? Okay, well, let me be present in that moment and use it in order to take that next step or move into that next form of treatment.
Yeah.
And not beat myself up for like, oh, I should have done it this way or should have done it that way. I can't go back and do that. So I can take the learning from it, apply it to the next time, and then deal with what is in the moment.
100%. I think a lot of people are really afraid to confront the reality that some problems are not solvable. And
Yeah.
like you just said very casually, you can do everything right and still things can go wrong in your health. That's a very threatening idea to most people. Most people would
Mhm.
rather think, no, you did something wrong. That's why you got sick. Good things only happen to good people. Bad things happen to not just a bad person, but saying like,
Right.
well, what was your diet like? Well, what was this? And
Oh my
I think
God.
there's a book I read once, honestly, it influenced me more than anything in regards to accepting my illness. It's called Fooled by Randomness. It's not about health at all. It's about just how humans are fooled by randomness all the time
Mhm,
in our
mhm.
lives and how we think like correlation means causation. We see two things and think that one caused the other. And it's really true with our health, right? It's
Right.
so much of it is we don't like to think it's out of our control, but that's probably the best thing that autoimmune disease has given me is I'm like, no, I know there was no external reason for me to come down with rheumatoid arthritis. Like
No.
I had no family history trauma, no other pre-existing health issues. I was happy, healthy, like everything was going well. And then I did get a virus. I got a virus, like this thing called and Coxsackie virus. And that is one of the known triggers for autoimmune
Oh,
disease. So
interesting.
I got that, but there was nothing in my control that I could have done. You
Right.
know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like,
Right.
so
Right.
that's that's life. Like
Yeah.
kids get cancer. Like it's
Right.
not all under our control, but people
Right.
like to live in this illusion that, oh, if you just eat organic and you just do this and meditate every day, like
Well, if that were the case at this point, I'd have zero flare-ups, and that's not, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
you said something about that everything's in our control. That's one of the biggest teachers of all of this for me is like, I can't control external. I can control how I show up.
Yeah.
Right. I can control how I show up into a group of people, into a doctor's appointment. I can control how I show up in my day. That's about the only thing, right? I can control my reactions and how I show up. And the rest of it is, like we both said, so you can do everything right and something can still go wrong. And there's a softening for me in that, like towards
Yes.
myself, is like having a little bit of grace for, you did everything you could, right? And something still went wrong, and you didn't do anything wrong. And so it has taught me, like you were saying earlier, like a lot more self-compassion. It's taken a long time to get there.
Yes.
But and honestly, if I ever expect or want compassion for others, I kind of have to start by giving it to myself.
Yeah, one of the steps for that Dr. Kristen Neff lists out for self-compassion is first you give, you honor the present moment and give yourself the comfort you would give a friend, but then you connect to the universal human experience of suffering. So yeah, it's not just about you too, right? So that's helpful too, to recognize that this is not just a me problem. This is an us thing. We all suffer, whether it's from health issues or other external things. So one last thing before we go into the half marathons is, do you have any advice for like caretakers or like maybe someone listening is like a loved one of someone with a chronic autoimmune condition, how they can be there and what maybe do's and don'ts?
How long you got?
Yeah, I know.
I mean, look, I'm going to get real personal here for a second. I just because I know we have a short attention span for suffering, I will flip this story, I promise. But when I was in a long-term relationship for over 10 years when I got sick, and it was about 6, 7 years in. And look, as a caretaker, there's a lot of worry, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of change plans, there's a whole lot of that. And when I definitely, the underpinnings for me felt like I was disrupting his life. And technically I wasn't, my health was. Certainly wasn't intentional. And I get it. Look, intent does not negate impact. I'm fully aware of that. At the same time, I'm doing the best I can. So all of these appointments, and I know there were some missed trips for him that were very special and all of this type of thing. And, I had a family member fly in to help out and all that kind of stuff. And when here's 6 weeks of multiple appointments and immobility, unable to walk, and 8 days in the hospital and all of this. And I'd been home for a couple of weeks, still basically immobile, laid up on a hospital or laid up on the couch. And he sits down at the end of that couch in a chair and he said, "Hey, can we talk?" Which was never a good sign. But at this point, I'm drugged up. I'm in pain. Like I'm, kind of still an optimist thinking maybe he's realizing like, God, this has really scared me. I never want to lose you, what have you. And he said, "I just want to say like, God, this has been a lot. I mean, this has been really hard." And I'm feeling hopeful in the pause. And he says, "On me." And my heart broke. Basically my heart broke for me from the standpoint of, oh crap, I have to suddenly get better, even though I didn't know how to do that. But that was where my mind went. As I was like, oh shit, we have to, pardon my language, we have to get back to perfection. We have to get back to everything's okay. I'm not the sick person. I'm not damaged goods. I'm not less than. And that was what that told me that I needed to do. And so I did. I went into this weeks and months and maybe longer phase of everything's fine, everything's okay. And I did eventually, and this is one piece of advice that I would give to folks, is I actually eventually went into therapy specifically for who am I now with all of these diseases and really owning it and finding somebody who could, my identity shifted, right? Instead of pretending that it didn't, I was like, I need help. Right. I need to understand how to live with this together because, where I might have gone to a gym and been standing on a street corner and my my muscles hurt before I'd go, oh, I'm sore. After this, that would happen and I'd go, oh, it's back again. Right. And so there's a way that you just go through your days different. And I needed help. I needed support of how to manage that. And so that experience of, as a caretaker, as someone who I thought had my back, was at my side, was going through this with me, to say that to me in that moment, and of course, years of relationship was all piled in there. It was actually pretty devastating at the time. And it's this one of those crystal moments that I've never forgotten. And here's where I've turned it. On the flip side, what I've been able to do with that experience and that since then is talk to people who are caretakers, spouses, partners, family members of folks who have chronic illness, autoimmunity, etc., and say this: I see you, I hear you. It is absolutely hard what you're doing. It's not easy. Like, first of all, it's not easy to watch your loved one go through pain and be in pain
100%.
and go through difficulty.
Yes.
It's also, your life is disrupted. There's worry, there's frustration. There can even be anger. You have to get that out. Just don't do it at the patient. Don't make them feel like they are a burden, that they have disrupted your life, that they are a problem, that they're exhausting and exasperating and frustrating you. So then what do you do as a caretaker? You go build your team, just like we as autoimmunity folks have to build our team. Like, who has your back? Who's going to listen without judgment, with all the frustration and exasperation and all the things that don't feel great that you have to get out? Get the therapy, get a team of people around you that you can vent to, get the people who'll be like, we're just going to go out and go bowling until you fall over. Like, whatever you need. Do you want a room that has plates that you can break and get angry? Go do that. It's the oxygen mask on first on the plane before you can take care of others. If you are unwilling as a caretaker to do that, you've got to find them somebody else, because as a patient, the last thing you want is that more stress, which can actually cause more inflammation and more flare-ups and more issues. So I feel clearly very passionate about that. And I'm really proud of the fact that I've been able to take my own terrible experience of feeling completely unsupported like that, then therefore I had to make it okay for them that, that I was less than, and let me take care of you, and been able to turn it around for other people. And I've had people come back and say, I've shifted the relationship with my spouse because I'm frustrated and I have all this stuff that I got to deal with, but I don't put it on them because their job is to get healthy or to manage better days. So that's my hope and my wish for people, that if you you do need to be recognized that it is not an easy position to be in, and let's be intentional about how we go about taking care of ourselves so that we can be more there for the person who needs us.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing that, because I know that even though you've shared it before and there's been time, I think anytime we revisit these memories, it's tough. It's tough to think about that how much vulnerable. I'm just imagining how vulnerable you must have felt, and then thinking that he's about to say something positive and like, we're in this together, and like, this is hard for both of us. Like, yeah, I'm a little stressed, but like, I obviously know you're suffering more than me or whatever. But then to have it be thrown back in your face, like, so get yourself better so that I don't have to deal with you. Like, that's just, it's horrible. And I'm going to link in the show notes one of the articles that I really think about a lot. It's called The Ring Theory, How to Not Say the Wrong Thing. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but it's just a visual description of exactly what you just talked about. It's saying whoever is suffering at the moment. Like, let's say it's actually the example that the person gives in the article is from cancer. Okay. So the person has cancer. Their coworker came in and visited them and complained about how hard this person's cancer was for the coworker. So they say the person, let's say in this case, the person with autoimmune disease, they're the middle of the circle. And then there's a series of circles that are bigger and bigger, like a target, right? Where they say, you need to give comfort to anyone who's closer to the suffering person than you are. And then you need to, if you want to vent, you only can vent about how the situation affects you to somebody further than you from the situation.
Right. Love that.
It's a visual. My brain's very visual.
Yes.
It's like if you're the best friend of the husband of the person who's sick, the best friend offers only comfort to the person who's sick and their best friend. And then they can dump or vent to people further. They can vent about the situation, seek comfort from people like their own parent or their own other friend that has something to do with the situation. So I think
that's brilliant.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
That's brilliant. I love that. I love that. Everybody needs to learn that.
Yeah, we just need to like carry this. It'd be like, actually, it'd be hilarious to carry this little circle thing around and be like, excuse me, actually, you can't complain to me about that because you're too. You need to find some. Your suffering is valid. That like in this case, the person that you were with was genuinely. I think all humans are entitled to whatever emotions come up for them. Their emotions are not in our control, right? So feeling angry, feeling frustrated, feeling like I had to have the conversation with my own husband about he's an engineer, you know, and he's a lot more private than I am. So I don't share a ton about him on the podcast, but I've shared this story before that we've had to have a conversation of, I understand that for you, I've said to him, it's threatening for you because you're a problem solver and you like to solve it and you're amazing at it. And I like that you solve problems. I'm not one of those people that's like, don't solve my problems. I'm like, no, please solve my problems for me. But my health is not a completely solvable problem. And we need to have kind of a script or some sort of routine for what we do that when we encounter an unsolvable problem that's not shutting down, because that is not helpful for me. So it's that whole thing is just but I think your example is just, you know, a good reminder to anyone that if you're the caretaker, you shouldn't. I know some caretakers think, oh, well, I shouldn't feel bad because I'm not even the person in pain. You know, my friend or family member's in pain, but you are entitled to your pain. You just need to seek comfort elsewhere, right?
Exactly. I mean, if there's one thing that autoimmunity has taught me is the old improv concept of yes and. And you just nailed it, right? It's like, yes, this is a frustrating situation, and this is how you be intentional about how you deal with it.
That's beautiful. I just listening to that song by Ariana Grande. Yes, sorry. So I was like, this is synchronous.
It's perfect. I love it.
Yeah, it's perfect. Well, okay, now that we solved that problem, which is anyone to listen to this podcast. But the next thing I want to make sure to spend some time talking about your amazing achievement. 2 days ago, you finished a two half marathons, 2 coasts, 2 days challenge. Tell me all, what was this about? How did you get into this?
Oh, well, the how I got into it, let's start there. So, you know, about 12 years ago or so, after sarcoidosis, after the initial attack, I was told I'd never run again. And I kind of joke, I'm like, well, that's fine. I wasn't a runner to begin with anyway. So you didn't take anything away from me. But then a few years later, a lot of big life stuff happened, and I needed something. I knew myself well enough to know that I needed something to aim for. So I decided to go big, and I went for a half marathon against doctor's orders. And most of my friends too, they were like, how come not a 5K? Like, why you got to go so big? I was like, well, because I need that reach. I need that push to see what's possible. And it was just supposed to be one half marathon. And very compressed story to jump to, I just did number 121 and 122. So I will say, like, I have used different markers as ways to raise money. And I've also had a lot of do not starts, we call them DNS in the running world. So signed up, couldn't do the race. And I would say every single time it's because of a flare-up or some sort of physical issue that is due to my health. And so, and sometimes I will push through, clearly, sometimes I don't, which is the right thing. But like, I had a really bad flare-up 2 weeks before my 75th half marathon, and had doctors in whatever hospital I was in at the time. You know, those particular doctors said, oh, you're not running that one on, you know, 2.5 weeks from now. And I was like, you know, I'm back on morphine, back on antibiotics, back on anti-inflammatories. And I still, in my head, I didn't say this out loud. I was like, yeah, watch me. You guys clearly don't know me very well. And then like the checkup doctor later from that, he heard the whole story. He was a different guy. And he was like, yeah, so I'm not going to be the one to tell you no. I was like, oh, you've got to know me. I appreciate that. And so all this time later, so here I am, it's a few months ago, and I'm thinking about March is Autoimmune Disease Awareness Month, which I try to do something around awareness every year. I know of Benaroya Research Institute. It's actually, strangely enough, kind of synchronous timing, in that it was 10 years ago that I first went to their luncheon, and learned about, and it's an emotional experience for me, emotional memory for me, because I remember I went into the lobby where, all the materials are and the signs and the celebration of what it is that they do. And I saw a couple of my autoimmune diseases listed. And it was the first time that I felt seen, and that I felt like I was part of a community, that I wasn't alone. And so I've been part of the Benaroya Research Institute, BRI's community, since then, because I so fully believe in what it is that they're doing, that the autoimmune diseases aren't being studied by themselves. They're bringing them together so that they can understand the commonality or the common thread that might be there, because they all have to do with the immune system, right? And so to me, I have such tremendous hope because of that. So I've been wanting to work with them more and more. I also raised money through an organization called Operation Shooting Star. Audrey, she herself has MS, her dad has RA, and she kind of had the parallel idea of, like, I think we used to say, we cure one to cure all. And so
I love that.
Right. And so that was, we ended up, for the 75th, this with Operation Shooting Star, we raised a bunch of money for BRI. And the pandemic has changed a lot of things, and this all came together very quickly. And basically, I mean, one of the things I tell people all the time, when you got these big, bold goals, like, you just got to take one step, which is the same thing in our autoimmunity journey. One step, right? You can't tackle all of it at once. You don't think about the finish line or a cure right now. You think about, what's my one next step?
Right.
And so I thought to myself, there's this race in DC, there's this race in Portland. I love to do both of these races. Suddenly this year, they're on the same weekend. I should pick one. And then I thought, well, I don't want to pick one or the other. I told you earlier, I don't live in this, binary either or type of world.
Why not both? That's very yes and.
Right. It's very yes and it's like, okay, is there a third option? Yes. The third option, which keeps me open and curious, the third option is do both of them. And now what do I do with doing both of them? And so I sent a quick email to BRI and said, hey, I have this wild, bold idea. What if I did both of them? It's in the middle of March. It's Autoimmune Disease Awareness Month. I honestly don't know if I can physically do them, but let's create a whole campaign. And that's what we did, is 2 halves, 2 coasts in 2 days, because I wasn't able to raise money. So I did run my 100th. The pandemic put a big 1.5 year break into stuff and delayed my dreams of 110 years. And so I wasn't able to raise money around the 100th. And there's that part of me. My running is bigger than me, always has been, always will be. If anything, it keeps even growing that way. It's why I keep running, is because I'm running for other people. And honestly, because I'm still in awe that I can do it at all. Like, people say that to me all the time. They're like,
yeah,
aren't you bored? Like, where's your inspiration? And I'm like, here's the reality is, every single time I'm in a starting corral, I get emotional, because I have this moment of, I cannot believe that I get to do this. I can't believe I'm doing this. And that awe is what keeps me going. And so I didn't know if I could do it, but I thought, let's use this big, bold challenge as a way to raise awareness and also raise money, so that we can, speed up the process and advance research, so that, maybe people born 20 years from now might actually have a genetic predisposition or get a virus that would trigger something, and they're able to catch it before it becomes something that they have to manage lifelong.
I love that. And I've been really lucky to have researchers from Benaroya Research Institute on 2 different episodes by the time this comes out. And I was actually shocked when they told me that they think there will be a cure for rheumatoid arthritis specifically in the next like 15 to 20 years, which I really didn't dare to hope for in my lifetime.
Right.
But I think it's such a beautiful purpose to help, bring awareness to, the importance of research for autoimmunity. And I think I just found this out. You probably already know this, but I'm reading a book that actually weirdly enough, a friend of mine wrote, called Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution.
Oh,
And oh, you love this. And she talks about how, did you know that until recently, women were not even included in any scientific clinical trials because menstruation, like the default body was the male body. I mean, I'm looking at your not surprised face,
yes,
but
no, yeah.
I was still surprised. Like, cause I'm like, how do you, so you then,
Right. How do you even get the
how did they
data if
research?
you're,
And then
yeah,
you think,
right.
and then you have all these conditions like autoimmunity that affect more women than men, and they're only being studied in men.
Right.
What is the
Right.
point? Like, okay, sorry, I love you, men, but like, what doesn't make any sense? So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
so sorry, that was a little this rant. But
I like
the
it.
fact, yeah, we need to bring all the, all the visibility that we can. And I just love how you're doing it in such a creative way, like, and okay, wait, okay, sorry. This is the occupational therapist in me. Like, I even looked up before this article or before this, I looked up some articles, like, what are the guidelines for exercise? Like, what are the, like, what do the doctors say? Like, and yeah, how are you? I was like, it says, oh yeah, people with sarcoidosis can usually manage like mild, mild
Right.
physical activity. How are you doing this? Like, because this is not mild. Like,
Yeah, so but first of all, and it's going to sound a little wild, but I run in Newton running shoes, and they have I found them, the first 5 half marathons I did were very painful and long recoveries.
okay.
And then someone told me about Newton, and there's a way that there's these on the forefront of the shoe, under the pad of your feet, there's these lugs, this technology that they use.
Oh.
And I started running in those, and they basically send energy back. So my joints don't take the same type of pounding that they do in other shoes. I don't feel like I'm dragging my feet, literally or figuratively. And so that's one thing that has been really super helpful for me. Like, I've run now, I mean, basically the first 5 were in shoes that shall not be named, and I've never run in anything but Newton since.
Newton. Okay, so it's
Yeah,
like
Newton running shoes.
N-E-W-T-O-N.
Yep,
Okay, I'm
just
gonna link
like,
to these in the comments.
yeah, Isaac Newton.
Okay.
And so those are, I cannot imagine doing this without Newton running shoes. So that's a big piece of this. The other piece is, and I've worked with the team of doctors that I'm in a constant conversation with, kind of, it's almost this, I'm pushing the edge. That's something that I do naturally, right? I'm always kind of on the edge. I want to see, how do I learn from this? Can I stress a little bit more so that I can learn from that stress and use it in a healthy way? Can I push on the edge a little bit so that it can see what else is possible? And so I've been leaning on that with these half marathons. And the conclusion that I'm working on is there's actually a way that it's pushed my health better so that I have fewer flare-ups, right? Because I'm keeping it at that tip of performance, right? So you bring sports psychology into this as much as I bring my autoimmunity into it, right? So it's like I'm on the edge and it's pushing me, and so it's like it's expanding what is possible within my health and within my autoimmunity. The key is, I've also learned, when I go past that, that's when I pay for it. So, for example, people have asked me for years, "Oh, are you going to run a marathon? Are you going to run a full marathon, or just a half?" Let's talk about the word "just" here in a second.
Yeah.
Are you going to run a full, or are you going to run, the half marathon? And for a couple of years, you get into the, 60s, 70s, 80s of numbers, and you're like, I guess maybe after 100, I should run a full marathon. And I will tell you, I will not do that. And there's a very specific reason why. I ran 11 halves in 4 months in order to get to number 100 at the end of 2021. And it took me over a year to recover.
Oh, wow.
Because I did too much. I then went past the tipping point. I push, keep myself on the healthier side, fewer flare-ups. But then I went to the other side. So it's like that horseshoe effect of, now I'm sick again. And I spent most of 2022 pulling out of races, going back to doctors. Like, it felt like a whole new diagnosis all over again. And I really had overdone it. I basically had no ferritin. My iron levels were gone. My body was in full recovery mode, had essentially shut down. So to that point of like, okay, what can you do? What can you not do? I'm always willing to play with pushing a little bit more, which is what this last weekend was about, but also, and also, um, recognizing, okay, when do you have to tap the brake a little bit, but not tap the brake to where I'm too far off the edge.
Yeah.
Right. So like, for example, this last weekend, what I had in my mind for Saturday is like, yes, run, yes, go, yes, have a great time. But you have another race the next day. Like,
Yeah.
what's the ultimate outcome? The outcome is to be here with you, right, on Tuesday, right? It's like,
Aw.
that's the outcome, and to finish the races, right? So I'm visualizing the finish lines. I'm not visualizing in this particular case, because I'm very intentional about how I approach each race. These races were not about time. I'm still, I've finished in relatively fast times, but it wasn't like, oh, I've got to get a new PR. My bigger goal was do the race, get on the plane, land, get my bags, and then do the race the next day, right? Though that's the overarching goal. So for me, it really is about like, it's always being on that edge, how far to push to keep myself healthy. And that goes back to listening to the voice, right? Is today a day to rest? Is today a day to push? And I'm not a typical runner. I don't run 25 miles a week. I can't. So I add all this other cross training. I do yoga, I do weight training, right? Woohoo. I hike, I walk, I do all of these other things, which makes me a different kind of runner. I'm not simply pulling in the miles. And then to go back to talking about the word just, all of that is well, I'm really also very passionate about not saying just a half marathon. And it's not to rise up my, personal achievements. It's 13.1 miles is no joke, right? That's a lot, right?
Yeah. I've never done one. Yeah.
Right. And I wish we could change the name, because the word half, it's like, it somehow feels diminishing and less than. We don't call a 5K a half 10K,
That's
right?
so
A 5K
true.
is its own identity.
Yeah.
Right. And
Just
so
call it a
this,
13 miler.
right,
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Like let's make 13 a lucky number.
It's Taylor Swift's lucky number. It's good
There
enough
you
for me.
go.
Yeah.
There you go. Taylor Swift, new sponsor for your podcast.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I already did like a 2 hour long episode of just me talking about Taylor Swift songs that I like. So
Amazing.
but they related to chronic illness, but still.
Wow, I'm impressed. That's awesome. That is awesome.
Sorry.
No. Yeah. So that I'm very passionate about, trying to see every time I do one of these races, it makes me think what else is possible. And I don't just mean that in running. I mean that in my autoimmune journey. I mean that in all sorts of things. And so this challenge of 2 halves, 2 coasts, 2 days was very much, I use one of the other tools I use a lot of is mindset training. You have to when it comes to autoimmunity and when it comes to running. And so I refused in the days leading up and this last weekend. There was never doubt. I never sat there and said, God, I don't know if I can do this. Like, God, I hope I can do this. It was like, I'm going to make this happen. I was just bound and determined because I had this bigger goal of bringing the awareness and raising the money and pushing all of that and really, truly feeling like I was running for so many other people who can't. Like I'm not kidding you. I had a couple miles yesterday. Wait, whenever that was, Sunday.
Yeah.
I had a couple miles where I was dragging and I went to my head and I said, okay, who am I running for? And I started thinking about all the stories of the people that I've talked to who themselves have autoimmune issues, or they have loved ones that do. And I started thinking about those people. I'm like, that's who I'm running for. That's who I'm running for. That's who I'm running for. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, like 2 miles are gone.
That's amazing.
Right. So it just, that's where the genesis of the weekend came from. It all came together very quickly. And there's absolutely no way I could have done it without Benaroya Research Institute's help. It's just been a tremendous challenge and a tremendous adventure to go on together.
Yeah, and I will put the link for where people can donate to the fundraising.
Yes, please. We're not done.
No, I just donated this morning.
Yes, you did.
And but the other thing I was going to say, so for people listening, I think one of the things that your journey highlights is that, and let me see how to formulate this coherently. Like, I sometimes feel like I want to go I want to make decisions based, as an occupational therapist, I want to make decisions based on the best available evidence. Otherwise, it's just too much to consider. Right. But I can't restrict myself to only the best available current evidence, because there's a lag between evidence and then when the evidence, scientific evidence is discovered and when it actually gets verified and published to the public. And you can look if at any point in history, like let's say in the 1990s, I've had people on this podcast with juvenile idiopathic arthritis. The recommendation was when you have pain, completely rest. Do not move your joints. That is actually the 100,000% opposite recommendation today in 2024. Like joints in motion. Motion is lotion for your joints, unless you're in acute flare. So it's like if at any point in history you said, well, I'm only going to go on the available evidence, you wouldn't be open to the possibility of new and emerging evidence. In your case, it might be that the average patient with sarcoidosis at most could do a 3K or a 5K, but you don't want to say because the average patient can do that, that doesn't mean that no individual can exceed that. And maybe your experience will inform. I'm totally spitballing here, so I'm not saying Beny has anything to do with what I'm saying. But the clinical guidelines, they might be not a clinical guideline, like the guidelines for exercise, from the physical therapy and occupational therapy guidelines, we have guidelines that we go on for different diseases. And they might say, hey, look, in 2020, we said this, but now it's 2025. We've got this new evidence from people like Gretchen that actually you can push yourself more than we thought. And it's okay. And not just okay, it helps your disease,
It's funny. You've just made me remember something that I've thought a lot about over the years. And that is the rheumatologist and the pulmonologist that said, you're never going to run again. And or here's the limitations for your life and all of that aspect of things. I've often thought about the fact that once I found this new way, I never went back to them and said, hey, by the way, not in a like you guys were wrong way, but more like, hey, I just want to give you a data point, because who do they see? They see the people that need to keep going back every month.
Yep.
And once I moved out of that phase, they have absolutely no idea from a data standpoint that I'm out here. So they had that, what if they'd had somebody like me? And so when they were giving me, here's your prognosis, what if they'd said, well, here's what we've seen, this is what we think. However, there is also still possibility, right? And I would have had a sense of hope at a time when I desperately needed it. Whereas now I'm creating my own sense of hope now. And so I've thought about that of like, God, I wonder if I could go find some of those doctors and be like, hey,
I thought
just want to let you know, like there's other possibilities out here.
I've thought about it, and I've known patients who've done that. And it's a very much like a repairing the relationship if they're open to it, which I would think of all specialists, rheumatologists should be on paper the most open to it, because they are the ones that know that everything's a gray area. There's no black and white, And so hopefully pulmonologists would also be open to it. I think that would be a really beautiful thing. Obviously you have a lot on your plate, but maybe forward them one of the articles. Like, hey, remember that girl you told she would never run? Just so you know, just finished number 122. And again, so they know. Yeah. A sign of a good doctor would be being able to change their mind in the face of evidence,
Yes. Perfect. Exactly.
Okay. Well, now it's time for the rapid fire questions.
Yes, ma'am.
We could probably talk about each one of these questions for 5 years, but
easily.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite words of wisdom for people newly diagnosed, either with sarcoidosis or just any autoimmune disease, however you want to answer?
I think I would say it the same way I would say it about running, is just it's one step at a time. It really is. And if I can add, recognizing that you're doing the best you can, have some grace for yourself. I actually still have a screensaver on my phone that says, be gentle with yourself. You're doing the best you can. Right. And it's just this reminder of, a lot of this is so difficult and it's not easy. And so instead of trying to get to the end of a diagnosis, what can I do? What's one step I can do today? So there's that. And then specific, like tangibly, I would also, it's the advocate for yourself, build a team of people around you. And that would include a therapist to just help you adjust to the way life is now. And that would be probably, and then, make sure you have people you can be really, truly yourself around. Get your couch friends.
That's a dream. That's a dream combo. Do you have a favorite autoimmunes like gadget or a joint pain gadget or tool in your toolbox?
I use yoga toes a lot to help the feet pain, foot pain. I use TENS, the little pads, the electric pads, to put on my muscles. Acupuncture for sure. Yeah, that'd be the biggest tools that I use, in addition to all the fun medications that we have to be on.
Oh, yes. Well, and yeah, you live in a good part of the world, in Sonoma for, I'm sure, acupuncture and stuff like that. There's a lot of, the Bay Area is good for that. I'm lumping it in the Bay Area. I know it's not in the Bay Area. The greater California, whatever. Do you have a favorite book or a movie or show you've watched recently?
Okay, so I have a favorite movie and a favorite book. So the favorite movie, I'm gonna probably get, I'll just own it. I had to watch a lot of hype movies, like personal hype movies over the last couple of weeks, and if I could practically recite Creed at this point.
Yes.
So I was born in Philly, so I have a little affiliation from that standpoint. Also, it's a brilliant film. I love how it's just a new way. It's another way to tell that story in an updated way. And I think they did a beautiful job. And Michael B. Jordan and Sylvester Stallone just blew the doors off that. And I reconstructed, there's a speech towards the end that Rocky gives to Adonis, and I reconstructed it for my own race this weekend of like one step at a time. Like, you've never done this before.
I love it.
Never done this before. I've never done anything like what I just did. Just still in shock, actually. But it's like, okay, how are you going to do it? One step at a time, 1 mile at a time, 1 step at a time, 1 mile at a time. So that's my movie right now. Like, oh my God, I love it so much. It's so silly. Every plane I've been on, I've seen it. And then the book that I can't get enough of, I've read it multiple times, and I actually have it because I always have it with me. It's The First Rule of Mastery by Dr. Michael Gervais. And it's Stop Worrying About What People Think of You. And what is so interesting to me about this book is it has nothing to do with autoimmunity, right? And he works with like the elite of the elite type of, top performers in any field.
Okay.
And yet I've been able to apply so much of stop worrying about what other people think of you. I think, honestly, I started reading this last fall multiple times, and I think part of it is actually what's helped me get to this point. I don't know that I'd be as open about my health journey in the last few months as I've been, other than stop worrying about what other people think, and the whole point of, being here for a purpose, trying to make a difference. So that's my book and my movie.
Okay, I'm definitely gonna check that one out.
Oh, highly recommend it.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite mantra or inspirational saying?
Yes, it's all over. I say it all the time. I have a couple. You heard me earlier say progress, not perfection, and break glass to make a mosaic. I stay curious. I have that in ink on my arm. And of course, we all say I can do hard things.
Yeah, I have it on my wall. I'm looking at it right now.
I can do hard things. Oh God, after this last weekend, I didn't need to prove it to myself, but I sure as heck did. But I have two things, and then obviously the 1 step, 1 mile. But two things. One is that I think about all the time is every step is a gift. Every mile is an accomplishment, and every finish line is a victory. And I put that in every single one of my social media posts, and it's come back to me so many times from other people, like just the ability. And it doesn't have to be about running. You can apply that to anything, right? And again, it goes back to the 1 step. And then because I'm always in awe at a starting line, and also that means that I'm probably a little bit nervous. When I feel that nervousness, I just think to myself, and I actually did learn this from Dr. Michael Gervais, everything I need is within me, and I can adjust when I need to. So it keeps me, let's say mile 3, all of a sudden the wheels start coming off. I already know how to do this. I've got consistent practice. Okay, I trust that. Okay, the wheels are coming off. I know how to adjust. I know how to shift this. Then it doesn't feel like the wheels are coming off. Nothing gets derailed. It's just like, okay, everything I need is within me. I can just take another step.
I love that. I'm definitely gonna read that book. What is bringing you joy right now?
Can I be a little cheesy and say this?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Like, honestly, like this time with you has brought me tremendous joy. And I really appreciate it. And I think the piece of bringing me joy is just these last few days, these last few weeks have been, being able to be out in the world and hear other people's stories, get reminded. I may have been an autoimmune warrior for all these years, and I still get reminded of like, oh yeah, I know that, but I can get reminded of things by hearing other people's stories and feeling like I'm running for them, making sure that they feel seen and heard in their own journey, and that there's somebody out there, maybe they're not ready to tell their story, or maybe they're not looking to run a half marathon. And I'm certainly not advocating that for people, but by doing this and kind of thinking outside the box a little bit, the joy of connecting with people over these last few weeks, in particular this last weekend, and getting in a sense to tell our story as a community. So many people like, oh, what's 2 halves, 2 coasts, 2 days? And then I get to tell them, and I'd say, you probably know somebody, right?
Yeah.
And there's probably people in your life like this, and there's people running this races like this, and having people kind of have that aha moment, and you see it in their eyes, and they suddenly realize like they might want to go ask a few more questions of the people around them and see how they're doing.
I love that. I feel that. And last one, before we just share your social media links, what does it mean to you to live a good life and thrive with autoimmune disease?
It definitely feels, I thought about that, and I don't feel like I'm simply surviving anymore. I definitely am thriving with all of this. And what does it mean to live a good life is to keep pushing that edge, right? To use the stress of running as a lesson towards my health, right? So instead of like, oh, this is a terrible situation, I feel terrible, it's pushing it. It's like we've been talking about. I push it to a certain edge so that I can learn from it, and then release some of the things that no longer work for me, and be more intentional about the ways that I show up. And so the living a good life, part of what that is also being willing to be more vulnerable and open about what this journey has been, so that, there's fewer people suffering in silence, and there's at least people are feeling seen and heard as they go through their own journeys.
I love that. Yeah. There's one thing I think everyone has in common is that everyone thinks that they're doing something wrong and everyone else is doing it better than them. And I have to remind myself that every single day I go on social media, remind myself, this is not someone's whole life. It's just a picture.
Right.
Don't compare your outtakes to someone else's highlight reel,
Right, exactly.
So I really resonate with that.
Exactly.
Yes. Sorry, I was just gonna say, speaking of social media, where can people find you online if they want to connect to you?
So on Instagram, it is Run Grateful.
I love that.
And the same thing on Twitter. Gratitude is a huge piece of this for me. It's resilience, and it's integrity, and it's intentionality, and it's gratitude, because I am grateful that, it's taken a long time. There's no instant answers, but I'm grateful, and I'm grateful that, as hard as running is, that's kind of where I feel free and healthy, and strong. And I'm grateful to be able to get to run. I'm grateful that I have access to good doctors. I'm grateful that I have an ability to tell my story. I'm grateful that I have the ability to hear other people's stories. And I'm grateful that I have the ability to keep learning, to stay curious and keep learning. And really I've spent probably the one thing I've concentrated the most on in the last year, in addition to my health and dealing with flare-ups, is weight training and mindset training. And those two have been game changers for me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Well, thank you so much. Again, I'm just astounded that you were, I feel like I would just be in bed 2 days after running 2 half marathons. So I am so grateful.
I don't think I'm not going to bed early tonight.
Okay, yeah, no. I thought you were going to say, don't think I'm going to bed right after this. Yeah.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah. But no, we really appreciate it. I hope, and I really appreciate the way that you framed everything. I think sometimes I know from the comments on social media that some people who are in a state where their disease is really severe to the point where it doesn't seem feasible to them to run.
Right.
Sometimes they don't like hearing from people's stories where it's like, if I can do it, you can do it. But I really appreciate you had a very balanced, like, this is your story. This was worked in your body. Right. And even if someone listening, what their goal is to get, to walk 2 blocks from their house and back, that's a huge accomplishment too.
100%. It's one step. It doesn't matter what your step is towards or what it's about, is can you take that one step? And maybe it could be as simple as the one step is to write the goal down, right? I mean, and that's what I did. I wrote an email to BRI and I said, I've got this wild bold challenge. What do you think? And had I not written that, had I not written it down, we wouldn't be here. And so it's so much, again, it goes back to that mindset training. It's like, if I can just, the one step is maybe it's writing it down, and maybe it's writing down, I want to walk to the mailbox today.
Yeah, that's huge. If you've had a hard time getting out of your house, that's huge. So
100%. I
I
know
really,
those days well.
yeah. I really appreciate everything you've shared today, and I can't wait to share this on social media and on the podcast. So hopefully people will connect with you afterwards. And I always like to remind people that if you want to see a transcript or video of this conversation, they will be on the Arthritis Life podcast, or our Arthritis Life website, arthritis.theenthusiasticlife.com. So
I love
thank
that.
you,
Thank you so
Gretchen.
much, Cheryl. I really appreciate your
Thank
time
you.
and energy.
You too. Okay, bye-bye for now.
Thank you.